The truth is that breaking free of the pleasure trap allows one to pursue worthwhile goals, including pleasures that do not simultaneously undermine health and happiness. The pleasures of excellent food and romantic interludes, along with the moods of happiness resulting from positive feedback in the process of pursuing worthwhile goals, are not muted by the removal of artificial and dangerous amplifications. Breaking free can result in rediscovering long-forgotten and marvelous feeling states. Rested, healthy, and fit, free from chronic pain, fatigue, health concerns, excess weight and its associated psychological baggage, you will discover spontaneous feelings of optimism and vigor. I am reading to you my highlights of the book The Pleasure Trap: Mastering the Hidden Force That Undermines Health and Happiness by Douglas J. Lyle and Alan Goldhammer. The pleasure trap is about the nature of your own struggle for healthy living. Get over the idea that you are emotionally or mentally defective with some sort of obsessive-compulsive eating disorder, that your hunger drive is your enemy. There is no flaw in your basic human design. Unfortunately, this design evolved over millions of years to work within an environment where calories were hard to come by, and these calories only came as whole natural foods. Losing this fight with Mother Nature results not only in poor health, but also in low morale. Quote, "I lack self-discipline and can never make progress," unquote. Both health and happiness are undermined. Unfortunately, when it comes to food, 99.9% of the people living in developed societies are caught up in this damaging behavior, making it especially hard for someone wanting to kick the habit and become healthy. Just as an alcoholic in a 12-step program must admit, we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. People overpowered by modern artificial foods must come to this realization. Ask any cigarette smoker how they quit. They were never successful while thinking they merely had a bad habit. They will tell you success came from putting every single ounce of energy they could muster into breaking free of their addiction. So if you want to win your battle over food, you must muster that same energy. Stop thinking you merely have bad eating habits. Get better acquainted with your adversary, your obstacles, your demons. Learn to master them. The bodies and minds of all creatures are designed for the same purpose, for survival and reproduction. Scientists have a more exacting way of describing this, the replication of genes, but it means the same thing. For more than 3,000 million years, creatures have battled, bitten, strutted, and stalked in a timeless and mysterious competitive dance. They instinctively knew all the steps and twirls, but never once did they grasp the overall scheme. All they knew was that sometimes they felt good, and sometimes they felt bad. Astonishingly, that was all they ever needed to know. In the natural environment, something that feels good is good. That is nature's way of guiding creatures to fulfill their biological purpose, survival and reproduction. When you look at yourself in the mirror, you are looking at a biological success story. You are the result of generation after generation of ancestors who got enough to eat and who were successful enough to reproduce. You are the prize your ancestors worked so hard to achieve, and you carry inside of you the genes and therefore the traits that made them successful. This biological feedback system is why doing well at the important goals of life leads to good feelings. Bad feelings are unpleasant but valuable signals that important life goals have been threatened, and they encourage us to do something about it. This motivational system is a three-part mechanism that encourages us to 1. Seek pleasure, 2. Avoid pain, and 3. Conserve energy. Collectively, we call these three components the motivational triad. In order to pursue pleasure, the Grey Shrike has to make choices and take risks. He has to fly around gathering up stuff and take it back to his territory. In doing so, he risks pain, or worse, he might expose himself to a predator and possibly forfeit his life. And to conserve energy, he must be efficient. He must make good use of his forays, because if he's inefficient, he will lose out to competitors. Throughout the springtime, he hunts and gathers. He may venture into another male's territory and risk a dangerous fight if the other shrike has a territory rich in stuff. In the end, he hopes to be rewarded with what seems to be the point of it all, which is to feel good, very good, with the intense pleasure of sexual activity. The three components of the motivational triad work together in order to encourage the shrike's behavior toward a particular goal. He seeks pleasure, avoids pain, and attempts to conserve his energies as much as possible. Very often, in both human and animal life, the rewards of pleasure are not immediate. Pleasure requires work, effort, skill development, and risky competition. Why bother, particularly if you can't even be sure that your search for pleasure is on the right track? Sometimes the path to pleasure can be a long and winding road. In human and animal life, the primary goals are the pursuit of pleasure, the avoidance of pain, and the conservation of energy. However, motivation cannot be sustained by these inducements alone. Nature needs an additional and related system, a set of signals to let pleasure-seeking animals know whether they are on the right path, the path to survival and reproduction. Those signals are the moods of happiness and unhappiness, and they work like the clues in a treasure hunt. Surprisingly, these subtle feelings are not caused by mini jolts of pleasure chemistry. These subtle experiences have their own neurochemistry and mechanics. Certain experiences, such as sexual behavior, result in large releases of pleasure chemicals, such as dopamine, which interact with pleasure systems in the brain. The more subtle feelings associated with steady progress are caused by the release of mood chemicals, such as serotonin, interacting with mood-regulating centers in the brain. Pleasure responses are the endpoints. The moods of happiness are the subtle reinforcing experiences along the way. Because they must act over much longer periods of time than pleasure, the moods of happiness are not nearly so time-limited. It is quite possible to be happy for hour upon hour each day, so long as our activities appear to be effective. It is not possible to experience intense pleasure reactions continuously because the neurochemical capabilities for producing pleasure are very limited. Although humans consider the pursuit of happiness to be a primary goal of life, these moods have rarely been life's primary focus. It is the twin pursuits of pleasure and pain avoidance that are instead the designed goals of our natural psychology. The moods of happiness and unhappiness are merely the feedback systems that tell us how well we are doing at those pursuits. If presented with a choice not available in his natural habitat, his motivational triad would generate behavior that would actually reduce his happiness. He would be trapped by his own motivational machinery into making his life something less than it could be. His senses could be fooled by artificial feedback, resulting in choices that seem right, but are self-destructive. We call this type of mistake an example of the pleasure trap. In our view, the pleasure trap is the root of the vast majority of disease, disability, and unhappiness in Western civilization. As anyone who has ever struggled with addiction knows, drugs may produce extraordinary jolts of pleasure, but may destroy one's happiness potential. Drug addiction is a primary example of the pleasure trap. Until recently, our motivational triad worked like a nearly infallible internal compass, pointing in a behavioral direction that we refer to as true north. The motivational triad used to encourage behavior that was consistent with the pursuit of our health and happiness. Our natural psychology has a motivational compass that includes 3 tools to direct us toward life-sustaining values: the desire for pleasure, the desire to avoid pain, and the need to conserve energy. Absent any of these 3 motivational components, our ancestors would not have lived to reproduce. Pain is the nervous system's way of telling us that something is wrong with our body. It is a warning device. Pain acts as a physical and psychological distress signal. It is an inducement to alter the relationship between the body and the environment until pain reduction occurs. When we experience pain, we instinctively follow a three-part strategy. 1. We sense the connection between the onset of pain and any specific behavioral error that might have induced it, such as when you touch the hot pot handle and feel burning pain. 2. If such a connection is detectable, we are motivated to stop the behavior as soon as possible. And 3. We take corrective action that is helpful in minimizing the damage to the body, using pain as a guide, such as protecting the blistered flesh from further aggravation. The spectacular rise of 20th century medicine can be traced to two distinct goals that it attempts to achieve: the healing goal and the pain relief goal. Armed with potent pain-reducing medications, the physician often avoids the time and energy-consuming task of learning more about the healing goal and what it entails. Too often, today's physician reaches for powerful pain-reducing drugs while ignoring the underlying causal nature of the patient's disease. This is an understandable but often tragic pleasure trap. When pain is blocked, the body's natural warning system is muted, encouraging the patient to continue a dangerous behavior. When pathogenic organisms are able to establish a foothold within our body, a fever may result. Fever is now understood to be a natural mechanism of defense generated by the body. Our body creates the fever in order to make life unpleasant for some micro-predator that is trying to eat us alive. Inflammation is another common bodily defense mechanism. It might be stimulated by a bug bite, a broken bone, or as a response to a bacterial or viral infection. Sometimes the causes of inflammation are not understood. However, what is understood is that the inflammation is not the ultimate cause of the disease process. Like fever, inflammation is a natural part of the body's attempt to heal itself. It is typical two-step medical practice to assume that the connection between a patient's discomfort and the location of inflammation is sufficient to determine appropriate treatment. Pain-relieving substances are destructive on two levels. First, they often encourage the continuation of damaging behavior that pain would naturally discourage. Second, they cause what are euphemistically referred to as side effects. Dietary restrictions are frequently helpful in the treatment of both rheumatoid and osteoarthritis, yet few patients are ever informed of this important treatment option. Most people believe that ingenious medical procedures are likely to save them from any disease process that they may have to face. This belief is absolutely false. The truth is far different and ominous. For the majority of diseases that challenge our population, modern medicine has no miracles. Our population faces a plethora of health dangers. Most people, over 75%, will die prematurely of strokes, heart attacks, congestive heart failure, cancer, or the consequences of diabetes. Our greatest threat is our awe of modern medicine. It is our belief that doctors, hospitals, and high-tech machinery are omnipotent, and that with the help of fancy tools and brilliant people, we can circumvent the laws of nature. The treatment of breast cancer and heart disease are touted as prime examples of the wonders of modern medicine. In fact, modern medical treatment has repeatedly been shown to have surprisingly little effect. The effect size of a given mode of treatment can be measured by what is known as the correlation coefficient, a number that describes the degree of treatment effectiveness. The correlation is signified in a statistical text as R. Correlations for treatment effectiveness can range from R 0.0, not effective whatsoever, to R equals 1, a perfect correlation, indicating that everyone is much better off with treatment rather than without treatment. Many techniques of modern medicine help us lessen our pain, but fail to help the body heal itself. On the contrary, many pain-relieving medications are actually counterproductive to health and healing. This creates a dangerous situation wherein we feel relieved if medication or surgery reduces our pain, yet we may actually be less healthy as a result. In this way, modern medicine, despite many legitimately miraculous advances, can be a pleasure trap. In our understandable awe of modern medicine's legitimate advances, we can lose sight of the fact that our personal health is predominantly determined by our dietary and lifestyle choices. Dietary preferences are part of the natural psychology of all creatures. Thus, animals normally choose wisely and do so automatically. It has always been in an animal's best interest to eat the most pleasurable food available and to eat as much of it as desired. But for people in our modern environment, this is no longer true because our pleasure-seeking system can no longer be trusted. Unbridled dietary pleasure-seeking will lead us astray into a dietary pleasure trap that can destroy health and well-being. Our modern diet, excessive in fat, protein, and refined carbohydrates, is the primary cause of disease and disability within industrialized civilizations. Our ancestors of 500,000 years ago lived as hunter-gatherers throughout Eurasia and Africa. They were an unusual life form for one reason. Compared to other animals, they were extremely intelligent. It wasn't until 100,000 years ago that the first anatomically modern humans appeared. Skeletal and other anthropological studies of these modern humans suggest the emergence of a striking new adaptive ability, unlike anything the world has ever seen. That ability was language. It would take a second major development for humans to emerge as the planet's dominant species. But in this case, it was not the addition of a physical, genetically based adaptive ability such as better eyes or wings or even linguistic ability. The second major development was not physical, but informational, as humans learned of a revolutionary possibility, the agricultural revolution. Early agriculture was a highly efficient method of obtaining life-sustaining calories as compared to hunting and gathering. As a result, it was no longer necessary for each individual to obtain his own food. With farming techniques, one person could effectively produce enough food for many people. This allowed others to create wealth by producing other goods and services. Farmers could trade for these other goods and services, setting the stage for a diversified economy. The efficiency of agriculture made this diversification possible. The percentage of animal products in the human diet probably increased substantially with the advent of agriculture. Instead of the hit-and-miss hunter-gatherer lifestyle, early animal husbandry provided a consistent supply of high-protein, high-fat animal food, in addition to cultivated grains and produce. The major threats to human life since 8500 BC, microorganisms and viruses such as smallpox, influenza, tuberculosis, malaria, plague, measles, and cholera have been literally invisible. These infectious agents, which we may refer to as micropredators, all have something of importance in common. Each evolved from a disease in domesticated animals that then adapted to and infected human societies. Those fortunate enough to rule did so for reasons straight from the motivational triad. They could get more pleasure with less pain and for less effort than was ever previously possible for members of our species. This made inevitable the development of a novel set of disease processes, the disease of dietary excess. A key component of the hunger drive is a tendency to prefer the most calorically dense foods available. Foods with greater caloric densities tend to be more pleasurable, as this preference is woven into our motivational architecture. For example, most people find that meat at about 1200 calories per pound is more pleasurable to eat than raw salad vegetables, which contain about 100 calories per pound. Choosing to consume a diet that is more consistent with our natural history will help you avoid the predictable consequences of an overly rich diet. The proper diet for humans consists predominantly of fresh fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, and nuts and seeds, and is the foundation of good health. People love to hear good news about their bad habits. John McDougall. The absence of something can be more important than its presence. Unfortunately, most of the expert information dispensed is erroneous and misleading. For example, people are often told that the real culprits causing their health problems are their genes. This suggests that any solution to their problems will require medical intervention because their body simply doesn't work properly. The real culprits in most modern-day health problems are excesses, not deficiencies. It is the subtraction of these excesses that will solve most of these problems, not the addition of medications or supplements. In atherosclerosis, for example, excess cholesterol, fat, and protein, mostly in the form of animal products, result in deposits of fatty substances within the cardiovascular system. These deposits clog up the system and contribute to heart attack, stroke, and congestive heart failure. While more than 1 in 4 men in the study who consumed a conventional diet succumbed to a heart attack, those who consumed a plant-based diet were extremely well protected. This is not surprising, as vegan vegetarians, those who eat no animal foods, have cholesterol levels that are 35% lower than non-vegetarians. Dr. Castelli has reported that in 35 years of the Framingham study, no subject with a cholesterol under 150 ever suffered a heart attack. By dramatically reducing the amount of animal product in the diet and by reducing fat intake from about 40% to about 10% of calories consumed, the body will soon begin to reverse the atherosclerosis. No medication or nutritional supplement additive has shown even remotely equivalent success. Grasping that the major key to health is mostly about subtraction and not addition is a major conceptual leap. Although seemingly simple, this connection is perhaps the most difficult principle in modern health science to understand. Dr. McDougall began an exhaustive review of the scientific evidence linking dietary patterns to disease. The results left him convinced that excesses of fat and protein, particularly of animal origin, together with excesses of refined carbohydrates and recreational drugs, were at the root of emerging health crises. We suspect that the human brain is biased against accepting that dietary excesses are the root of most health problems, and thus the difficulty grasping this truth despite the scientific evidence. Conversely, the idea that some sort of deficiency is responsible continues to be popular. This is probably because such a concept has intuitive appeal. Brains come into being with hardwired biases, that is, tendencies to see some connections much more readily than others. The brains of humans and other animals are much more likely to see connections that they expect to see. And the connections that they expect to see are often those that were important to notice throughout the natural history of the species. People who walk the earth today are all descendants of those who faced the problem of getting enough, as opposed to worrying about getting too much. As such, the neurological circuits that make up the human mind are naturally concerned with deficiency. Starting without the proper framework, it isn't at all obvious that the Earth is a sphere and that it moves around the Sun. And it is not at all clear that the absence of a number is as important as its presence. Though obvious to us, these concepts are not elementary challenges for the natural human mind. If we then follow the evidence and the logic, we can assume that the solution is to subtract foods of excess from our daily fare. And as we subtract meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, sugar, and refined carbohydrates from our diet, what remains are foods that promote health. Fresh fruits and vegetables, tubers, whole grains, legumes, and nuts and seeds fill the void after the subtraction has taken place. In response, the previously overburdened body begins to regain its health. Dr. Esselstyn is well aware of the current state of conventional medical thought and advice. Oil, dairy, and meat are atherosclerotic linchpins, says Dr. Esselstyn. We must eliminate the lethal phrase, "this little bit won't hurt." His own research, paralleling that of Dr. Dean Ornish, Esselstyn has documented the most successful cardiovascular reversal program on record. In his study, patients who complied with the program and who had collectively experienced 48 cardiac events prior to the program experienced 0 cardiac events during the subsequent 12-year program. His success lies in his relentless but caring insistence on a health-promoting plant-based diet. 1. Health is best supported by the removal of all meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, and added oil, salt, sugar, and refined carbohydrates. Also to be avoided are recreational drugs such as alcohol, caffeine, and tobacco. 2. Health is most effectively promoted by healthful living, consuming a diet of whole, natural foods, exercising, getting appropriate rest, and avoiding toxic substances. Such a lifestyle not only prevents disease, but in many cases is able to reverse disease and help restore health and well-being. Where has it ever been observed in nature that a species in its natural environment either underfeeds or overeats to the point of health compromise? The answer appears to be never, and this observation is crucial evidence of a natural law of profound significance. Animal feeding behavior appears to be regulated by what we be termed the law of satiation. In a natural setting of caloric abundance, animals will consume the correct amount of food needed for optimal function. In an environment with adequate caloric resources, animals simply eat until they are satisfied, over and over again throughout the length of their lives. In doing so, they never compromise their health by consistently either overeating or undereating. Although there are animals that are more slender than others, this is not because their mechanisms of satiation are underestimating their caloric needs. They are simply normal individuals of slender design. More interesting is the fact that there are no obese chimpanzees, individuals that have consistently overestimated their caloric needs by even 1%, found in the wild. For if they had, by the end of their lives, they would be some 100 pounds overweight, the inescapable consequence of overeating by 1% over the course of their existence. In their frustration, many overweight people come to believe that they must consistently override their hunger drive and eat less than they desire if they are ever to achieve an optimal weight. This seems reasonable, since by eating to satiation, they appear unable to normalize their weight. But in reality, nothing could be further from the truth. Overweight people do not need to, quote, learn to push away from the table, unquote. They need only to learn the true nature of the law of satiation and then act accordingly. The secret lies in what we eat, not in how much. The human body is designed to maintain optimal weight by balancing caloric intake with caloric need. While millions of people fail to achieve this balance, it is through no fault of their natural design or of their particular genes. There are 3 primary inhibiting forces to hunger, and these forces are designed to work together to make sure we neither accidentally starve to death nor consistently overeat. These mechanisms are found throughout the natural world and are key to how the law of satiation works. They are fundamental in making sure that humans and other animals do not consistently eat too much when extra food is available. We refer to these mechanisms as 1. Stretch sensation, 2. Nutrient sensation, and 3. The, quote, Joule circuits. Understanding how each of these forces works will reveal why weight management problems occur and what to do about them. Stretch receptors are invaluable aids in helping animals know when they have eaten enough. They are the reason that you will never accidentally eat 25 apples for lunch or be satisfied with a single sunflower seed when hungry. Our nutrient receptors are able to detect the differences between foodstuffs of differing caloric densities. Foods differ dramatically in how many calories they contain per unit of weight or volume. Food is composed almost entirely of substances referred to as macronutrients. These include protein, carbohydrates, fat, fiber, and water. In addition, food also contains tiny amounts of substances called micronutrients, including vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals, which have not been associated with satiation. Macronutrients, however, are the substances that influence satiety. The macronutrients and their respective approximate caloric densities are as follows: protein, 1800 calories per pound, carbohydrates, 1800 calories per pound, fat, 4000 calories per pound, fiber is essentially no calories per pound, and water, no calories per pound. The hunger drive works in conjunction with stretch and nutrient reception to modulate hunger at about the right amount. At any given meal, a creature might be overeating or undereating for the present caloric demands. However, day-to-day inaccuracies are averaged in an unbiased fashion toward near perfection. While the hunger drive is primarily influenced by the amount of short-term energy stores, the degree of hunger is also influenced by a fat reserve monitoring system with sensors all over the body. This is a system designed to detect the extent of the body's fat storage and to communicate that information to the feeding centers of the brain. The system is comprised of a set of neural equipment that we have dubbed the Joule circuits. Our modern diet is artificially concentrated, and this artificial concentration causes our calorie counting machinery to make errors. Specifically, our calorie counting machinery consistently underestimates the caloric value of artificially concentrated foods, and this inexorably leads to overeating. Our modern diet is artificially concentrated with high-fat animal products, oils, sugar, and other refined carbohydrates. Our ancestors rarely consumed as much as 20% fat, as the fattiest foods available were wild game, containing only about 15% fat. But in the modern environment, our diets are replete with artificially high-fat foods, whose fat percentages are typically between 35 and 80%. Modern diets are also laden with plant foods whose natural fiber has been damaged or partially or completely removed, the usual case. Plant fiber is non-nutritive, meaning that it contains no calories, though it does provide other important effects. In the ancestral world, all plant foods were eaten with their entire complement of undamaged fiber. In contrast, the modern affluent diet is grossly fiber deficient, and this deficiency results in greater caloric concentration of the diet. Fiber-deficient products like white bread, pasta, and white rice are called refined carbohydrates. It can be puzzling why some individuals are able to eat anything they want and not get fat. A partial explanation for this observation is genetic variation. While some people may be able to accurately sense the caloric content of a 50% fat meal, most are not. For most people, a meal containing 50% fat is just too calorically concentrated to accurately assess, and so they tend to underestimate the meal's caloric value. While the ancestral diet was perhaps 10 to 20% fat, the standard American diet is more than double this level. This means that tens of millions of people, in fact most people, are consuming an unnaturally concentrated diet. This diet is miscounted by our bodies and is a primary reason why people are overweight. Exercise is an important component of a health-promoting lifestyle. However, exercise is not the key to weight management. Extensive scientific investigation has concluded that exercise deficiency is a comparatively minor contributing cause of excess fat. The largest determining factor is the artificial concentration of today's high-fat, low-fiber diet. Slender people, in contrast, seem to be getting away with the standard American fare, but they aren't. They too suffer many health consequences as a result of their diet, such as heart disease and cancer. By luck of their genes, they may manage to avoid becoming fat, but that may be all. Their slenderness is not evidence of any physical or psychological superiority. Their slender bodies are not evidence of their superior childhood upbringing, emotional health, or self-discipline. It is simply that their satiation machinery is able to more accurately count the caloric intake of artificially high-fat fare. We are designed by nature to consume the majority of our calories from pants. On this point, there is little dispute among dietary paleontologists. Fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds have been the dominant source of calories for our species. Fiber increases the amount of stretch receptor activity in the gastrointestinal system and thus helps the system to achieve an accurate calorie count. The number of US children that eat the recommended daily amount of fruit, vegetables, and grains is about 1%. The standard American diet is extraordinarily fiber deficient, containing only perhaps 10% of the intake that would be found in our natural diet. Many authorities assume that weight management is psychological. It is often stated that one must learn to set the fork down between each bit of food or remain calm so as not to eat for emotional reasons. However, the evidence strongly suggests that subtle psychological mechanisms are not the key to weight management. Rats will maintain ideal weight under all sorts of stressful conditions if eating a healthy rat chow. However, if bread and chocolate are available as desired, the average rat will increase its body weight in fat by 49% within just 60 days. Our mechanisms of satiation can work properly only if we eat foods consistent with our design. It is when we fail to do this that problems result in the form of poor health and weight gain. The solution is not to learn how to eat less than desired, but rather to eat in a way that is appropriate for our species. Dopamine-stimulating substances such as cocaine, caffeine, alcohol, amphetamine, and chocolate stimulate pleasure circuitry for a short period of time. Some chemicals, such as cocaine, can be so reinforcing that soon nothing else matters. Food, sex, or caring for offspring becomes unimportant. Food, like drugs, can stimulate dopamine cascades in the pleasure centers of the brain. But there is food, the bounty of nature that we were designed to eat, and then there is magic food, the stuff that we have created. Perception is largely a response to relative changes, not to absolute levels of stimulation. When there is a sudden increase in stimulation, nerves increase their firing rate, the speed at which sensory information is transmitted. Our sense of taste is also subject to neuroadaptation, a fact that has enormous implications. The vast majority of people in industrialized societies are neuroadapted to a high-fat, high-sugar, and high-salt diet. But like smokers oblivious to their odors, most people have little or no awareness as to how extraordinary their dietary choices really are. Drugs such as cocaine, alcohol, caffeine, and nicotine artificially stimulate the firing rate of neurons within the pleasure centers of the brain. This is the reason for their appeal. In cases of long-term drug and alcohol abuse, pleasure center activation may be compromised indefinitely. Although with abstinence, an addict can recover some percentage of pleasure response sensitivity, some of it may be lost forever. This helps to explain why relapse is so common and why drug addiction is such a tenacious pleasure trap. In just the past 2 decades, our caloric intake, mostly from increases in refined carbohydrates and sugar, has skyrocketed by 650 calories per person per day. Modern foods are tastier than ever before, as the chemicals that cause pleasure activation have been isolated and artificially concentrated. Meats, once consumed as wild game with perhaps 15% fat, are now genetically engineered and growth hormone controlled, and routinely contain as much as 50% or more fat. Unlike drugs, modern foods have not been shown to destroy pleasure system circuitry. However, the process of becoming resensitized to natural food usually needs 30 to 90 days of magic food abstention. And this requires more self-discipline than most people are willing to muster. People naturally enjoy potatoes, which at 500 calories per pound are moderately rich. But people love potato chips, which are drenched in vegetable oils and contain 2,500 calories per pound. Our natural motivational mechanisms, seeking the most survival value for the least effort, draws us toward foods of extreme caloric density. This artificial caloric density has effects that, like drugs, are both compelling and deadly. A pleasure trap exists when a component of the motivational triad is deceived. This occurs when drug use, as pleasure centers in the brain may be doused in dopamine, resulting in a short-lived, exaggerated feeling of well-being. The rewarding nature of these experiences can lead to habitual use and to a phenomenon known as tolerance. Also known as neuroadaptation, this condition encourages further use and may result in both physical and psychological self-destruction. 1. The first weapon against the problem of taste addiction is the knowledge that taste buds readapt to whole natural foods within a few weeks. That is, most people are merely a few weeks away from being able to enjoy healthy fare and support their health with minimal taste sacrifice. 2. A second weapon is the use of a short-term monodiet of a favorite whole natural food such as watermelon or a juice diet. Such techniques remove virtually all salt and fat from the diet for 2 or 3 days and help to restore sensitivity to taste nerves. This can make for a much easier transition to a diet of whole natural foods. Example is not the main thing in influencing others, it's the only thing. Albert Schweitzer. In human behavior, the concept of integrity is narrowed to a particular issue, the integration of values and behavior. In general, people behave with integrity. Their behavior is automatically consistent with their most important values. Your health-promoting behavior will cause 2 types of people a good deal of consternation, and these people will often attempt to relieve their own psychological discomfort by pressuring you to change. These 2 types are best managed quite differently. We refer to these as the misinformed and the irritated, and you need to be well prepared for both. Embarrassment is an unpleasant emotion that results when a person loses status or regard. If you have brought an inappropriate gift to a party, for example, you may well feel embarrassed. This feeling is designed by nature to signal to you when your actions have resulted in reduced status. If you choose to remain on a healthy course while others choose to indulge, they know that you are observing them breaching their integrity through their unwillingness to exercise restraint. They know further that if you maintain your integrity, they lose status with you. And when they lose status, they experience embarrassment. They are hurt and subsequently irritated. Soon you may be able to create that rarity in intimate human relationships, a place where good people can peacefully accept each other's differences. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Sir Winston Churchill. Nothing is particularly hard if you divide it into small jobs. Henry Ford. When hungry, in pain, our population consistently seeks out the quickest, most calorically concentrated, and easiest food-seeking alternative. This means fast food. No behavioral scientist could realistically expect otherwise. Our technological civilization is, in effect, founded on the principle of energy conservation. Most of the utility of civilization comes from the efficiencies resulting from the specialization of labor. The easy way is to accept this situation and to hope for the best. Unfortunately, the easy way is no longer the best way. The path of least resistance is no longer the smart move, as the world for which that strategy was designed no longer exists. Should we desire to defend our health and maximize our life experience, we must now act in ways inconsistent with our instincts. In our 20 years of helping people work toward healthful living, strategy number 1 is the most important tool we have discovered. No junk food in the house. These ancestors were the first to exploit what anthropologist John Tooby and evolutionary psychologist Leader Cosmides have jointly described as the cognitive niche. This means that instead of simply adapting to an environmental niche, our ancestors began to modify the shape of nature using the power of the mind. This was the development of the human cognitive niche, wherein the mental processes of thinking, learning, and creating became survival tools of profound importance. Beginning with efficient hunting and continuing with the manipulation of plant production, our species developed a way of life outside our natural ecological niche. We came to have artificially high population densities, with our survival dependent upon the manipulation of nature. This extraordinary historical phenomenon, the wedding of science to technical problems of survival, became known as the Industrial Revolution. By the middle 1800s, the quality of life for those living within the reach of Western science was rapidly improving in a process that would eventually become the envy of the world. The ecology is not the result of a well-ordered, well-balanced scheme. It is the result of a brutal dynamic contest in which those with an upper hand are instinctively driven to exploit every advantage, but there are natural limitations to any upper hand. When a given species becomes particularly effective within an ecological niche, its numbers expand. With this expansion comes increasing competition within that species for limited resources, as well as increased opportunity for predators. With a human invasion of the cognitive niche, however, our ability to artificially intensify food production has resulted in human population expansion, a biological success unchecked by the normal constraints of food supply and predation. We no longer forage for plant food. We grow plants treated with pesticides, harvesting them at will. We no longer hunt wild game. We consume animals that live out their lives in feedlots, injected with hormones so that we can get more pleasure for less effort. These animals live in artificially close quarters, eating a contrived food supply, protected from predators. Their artificial population densities leave them susceptible to another natural constraint, predation from microorganisms. More than 90% of all antibiotics produced are slated for animal administration. The single greatest threat to health within industrialized society is atherosclerotic vascular disease, a condition largely attributable to dietary excess. Together with cigarette smoking, it is the excessive consumption of fat and protein in general, and animal fat and animal protein in particular, that is at the root of most stroke and heart failure. But there is another major health threat, with causes that seem mysterious. It destroys millions of lives annually. That threat is cancer, a disease that is at once both physically and psychologically devastating. Unlike vascular disease, which has been shown to be reversible through diet and lifestyle choices, cancer is too often a diagnosis without hope. The idea that toxins in the air, water, food, and general environment might cause cancer has only contributed to our collective sense of powerlessness. After all, we have no choice but to breathe, and we have to eat something. The belief that cancer is the result of exposure to carcinogenic toxins is partially correct, but it is extremely misleading. The truth about cancer is more complex and much more promising, for it appears that the primary culprit in the development of most cancer is observable and controllable. It is the consumption of animal protein. One of the first to grasp this connection was Cornell University biochemist T. Colin Campbell. A scientist with a diversity of research interests, Campbell was particularly interested in the connection between toxic chemicals and cancer. As fate would have it, he happened upon an obscure research paper published in India reporting on a study in which rats exposed to a class IA carcinogen, aflatoxin, were fed either a 5% protein diet or a 20% protein diet. Campbell found himself puzzled by the results, which were completely counterintuitive. Every single rat fed the 20% protein diet developed liver cancer or its precursor lesions, whereas not a single animal fed the 5% protein diet developed liver cancer or a precursor lesion. Great discoveries are often made by those who refuse to explain away the inconvenient detail, those with the courage and determination to question what everyone knows. Campbell and others have discovered that cancer is being constantly created in the body by various and assorted environmental assaults, primarily through dietary pathways, but also through toxic chemical exposure, including cigarette smoking. However, toxic exposure is often insufficient for the development of cancer. In order to defeat the body's natural defenses against it, cancer must be promoted. Campbell's investigations have shown that animal proteins are by far the most effective promoters of cancer that have been identified. And to his surprise, Campbell has discovered that the primary protein of dairy products, casein, appears to be the most aggressive promoter of all. Cancer develops in a three-stage process that involves initiation, promotion, and finally progression. Initiation is a process of DNA derangement that can take place within minutes of exposure to a toxin. By itself, initiation is not dangerous because we have anti-cancer machinery that effectively eliminates these cellular mishaps. The most critical part of the process is promotion, in which the fledgling cancer is fed and encouraged, a process that takes place across months and years. It is here that animal protein does its damage, leading to the final stage of cancer that we can observe with medical instruments and even the naked eye, progression. By this time, there is usually little to be done, as the cancer is no longer controllable. It appears that regardless of the level of exposure to the initiating carcinogen, many cancers may be unable to develop and progress without the presence of animal protein in the diet. When Asian women migrate to the United States and adopt our dietary practices, they experience increased breast cancer rates of up to 500%. These findings support the conclusion that diet is the primary causal factor responsible for the strong correlation observed worldwide between dietary habits and cancer incidence. A diet of whole natural foods not only promotes the reversal of cardiovascular disease, but also provides the body with a rich and continuous supply of phytochemicals, nutrient-like substances that combat cancer formation. On a calorie-per-calorie basis, plant-based foods contain much lower concentrations of environmental toxins than do animal-based products. This is because of a phenomenon known as biological concentration, wherein animals act as filters for environmental toxins and concentrate these toxins in their tissues. We appear to be best protected by minimizing or eliminating all animal products from our diet. And the more toxic our environment becomes, the more importance this prescription will have for all of us, both individually and collectively. It is not always the biggest and the strongest that survive and thrive, but the fittest. At any given moment, the day belongs to those creatures that adapt most effectively to their environments, who fit the best, not necessarily those with the biggest muscles or the sharpest teeth. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Benjamin Franklin, Poor Richard's Almanac. We are designed by nature to sleep while it is dark, about 9 to 10 hours each night. It is now understood and appreciated that humans are designed by nature to sleep to satiation. That is, we are designed with our desire for sleep to match our need for sleep. Our desire for sleep, like our desire for food, obeys a law of satiation. The attempt to circumvent this law will cause impaired mental and physical performance. If designed to be awake in daylight, diurnal, they sleep to satiation every night. At daybreak, nighttime sleepers wake spontaneously, feeling fully refreshed. They begin each new day with an optimistic vigor that is easy to recognize. Often tired the next morning, most of us use stimulants to medicate the unpleasant fatigue. More than 90% of American adults are habitual users of caffeine, a powerful stimulant that temporarily camouflages sleep deficiency. Other stimulating substances are tobacco and chocolate. Though fatigue is the number one complaint heard by primary care physicians, few recognize that sleep deprivation is the most common cause. The price of chronic sleep deficiency includes impaired cognitive function, resulting in lost work productivity and increased accident rates. Other prices are losses in vitality and natural optimism, and the possible genesis of anxiety and depressive disorders. Even minor sleep debt causes measurable compromise to immune function, making us more susceptible to infectious disease. Caffeine increases blood pressure and may increase the potential for heart attack or stroke. Caffeine is among a group of chemicals called methylxanthines, shown to increase nervousness, irritability, and gastric acid secretion. It is hardly surprising that chronic sleep deprivation is also associated with anxiety, irritability, and depression. Studies at the University of Pennsylvania have shown that when sleep debt is removed, people soon feel more vibrant, healthier, and significantly more optimistic. The light bulb is primarily responsible for people artificially extending the length of their day and reducing their sleep. The resultant sleep debt is not only thought to be responsible for the majority of fatal accidents in the United States, but also for a population that is increasingly fatigued, depressed, and stressed. If you want to know what health is worth, ask the person who has lost it. John Robbins. By the middle to late 20th century, the effects of the pleasure trap were evident. Diseases once reserved for royalty were seen in epidemic proportions throughout industrialized civilization. Cardiovascular diseases, rare just decades earlier, became the most common cause of death. Cancer, diabetes, obesity, and drug addiction likewise became ubiquitous, drowning the good life in a sea of heartbreak. All of these epidemics are new to the mid to late 20th century. All are a direct result of modern abundance, and nearly all are preventable if the hidden force that can be recognized and effectively neutralized. Dopamine is the chemical that excites the pleasure centers in our brains. It is the chemical that causes euphoria, a profound sense of excited satisfaction that feels extremely rewarding. It is always short-lived, as it is naturally biologically expensive. After an intense dopamine interlude, such as eating a satisfying meal or engaging in sexual activity, a second type of pleasure neurotransmitter floods the brain. These are called endorphins, and they cause the feelings of relaxation that we also find pleasurable. Curiously, dopamine is little related to the longer acting periods of feeling good, which we call happiness. The moods of happiness are regulated through different neural circuits than those regulated by pleasure, and they use different neurochemistry. It is now widely believed that the most important of these chemicals is serotonin, the neurotransmitter that most modern antidepressant medications attempt to stimulate. Effective behaviors like making progress at a worthwhile task, enjoying time with friends, or doing well at an interesting game cause serotonin levels to increase. So does a health-promoting diet and sleeping to satiety. Even mild sleep deprivation disrupts serotonin replenishment within specific neural circuits, resulting in a reduced sense of physical and psychological well-being. Notably, regular exercise also causes serotonin levels to increase. Pleasure-seeking enticements such as rich foods, coffee, cola drinks, alcohol, and recreational drugs are different faces of the same trap. By causing artificially intensive releases of dopamine within the brain's pleasure centers, these substances create a deceptively intense, short-term feeling of well-being. Not feeling good is an instinctive signal for action, but when we are not feeling well, we are unlikely to make the connection that a lack of sleep, exercise, and good dietary choices are the cause. We are unlikely to identify coffee, chocolate, high-fat foods, late-night TV, and a lack of exercise as factors. Quite the contrary, we are likely to suspect that a pleasure deficiency is the cause. The pleasure trap is more than one force. It is a system of forces, and this makes breaking the cycle a great challenge. Pleasure seeking leads to obesity, exhaustion, and addiction. Pain avoidance disguises serious symptoms and discourages health-promoting actions. And finally, energy conservation discourages exercise, the lack of which undermines mood regulation, fitness, and sleep quality. These facets of the pleasure trap reinforce each other, actively discouraging healthy change. Any positive choices may first result in less pleasure, more pain, or require more effort. In the short term, good decisions can result in what appear to be bad outcomes. It can be a vicious cycle, a confusing trap. Whether the issues are interpersonal, financial, political, or philosophical, we find time and again that the phrase everything in moderation is laden with truth. It is understandable then that, with respect to health behavior, this time-tested philosophy is viewed as prima facie grounds to reject any program of radical change. There are two popular misconceptions about moderation with respect to dietary and lifestyle practices. The first is the myth of moderate consumption, the notion that any lifestyle habit is healthy and acceptable, provided it is practiced in moderation. The second is the myth of moderate change, the idea that the goal of healthy, lasting change is best approached by beginning with only modest changes, slowly building toward greater success. How much cocaine is a healthy and moderate amount? The answer is again none. For materials that do not have a natural and healthy relationship to the body, the healthy and moderate amount is none whatsoever. This is true with respect to modern animal products, products completely inconsistent with the natural history of our species. And of course, the healthy amount of artificially fiberless vegetable materials, white flour products, oils, sugars, sweeteners, and other refined foods is similarly none. The same is true for coffee, alcohol, tobacco, cola drinks, and other dietary drug-like products. Optimal results are not achievable without optimal behavior, and in this case, optimal behavior has the appearance of the extreme. In today's pleasure-trapped world, it is. Even what may seem reasonable with respect to today's artificial dietary and lifestyle enticements can be self-destructive. A better strategy for the long haul is to encourage modest but steady efforts with modest expectations. In this way, over time, small positive changes can build into moderate improvements, which may subsequently blossom into impressive achievements. whether the goal is skill attainment, knowledge acquisition, wealth building, or social development. Targeting slow and steady progress is a fine strategy. Desired outcomes requiring extraordinary discipline and single-mindedness are rare. This is the concept of moderation and change. While useful in many arenas of life, it is highly misleading with respect to dietary and lifestyle practices. Unlike other life domains, achievement in diet and lifestyle modification faces the paradoxical motivational dilemmas inherent in the pleasure trap. With respect to these particular types of problems, a slow and steady strategy is rarely successful. Eradicating self-destructive dietary and lifestyle habits is a task equivalent to breaking free from drug addiction. The majority of people who try to go halfway will remain in the trap. The discipline to limit oneself to just a few French fries, an occasional milkshake, or a periodic cup of coffee is a remarkably difficult task, akin to an alcoholic cutting back to just wine or beer. The problem is with the nature of the pleasure trap. Breaking free of the pleasure trap is not about a life of denied pleasure and self-sacrifice. It is not about adopting a program of self-righteous abstention. The truth is that breaking free of the pleasure trap allows one to pursue worthwhile goals, including pleasures that do not simultaneously undermine health and happiness. The pleasures of excellent food and romantic interludes, along with the moods of happiness resulting from positive feedback in the process of pursuing worthwhile goals, are not muted by the removal of artificial and dangerous amplifications. Breaking free can result in rediscovering long-forgotten and marvelous feeling states. Rested, healthy, and fit, free from chronic pain, fatigue, health concerns, excess weight, and its associated psychological baggage, you will discover spontaneous feelings of optimism and vigor. A regular bedtime hour is also ideal, providing a routine that helps the body regulate hormonal activity. Make no mistake, the task is difficult. The motivational triad actively lobbies against healthy changes. That is the nature of the pleasure trap. We introduce you to an ancient process called fasting, an extraordinary healing technique that can save your life. While fever, inflammation, and other symptoms are finally becoming recognized as components of adaptive processes, the importance of the loss of appetite, characteristic of many disease processes, is still largely unappreciated. This symptom causes a tendency to refrain from eating when ill, a widely observed phenomenon in animals. We shall see that the natural consequence of honoring this tendency, a sustained period of water-only fasting, brings about remarkable adaptive responses that are only beginning to be properly appreciated. Among the many vicissitudes of life, two adaptive challenges repeatedly confronted our ancestors: periodic famine and illness. Though there were undoubtedly periods of caloric bounty, there were also times of caloric poverty. Famine and illness were two recurrent adaptive challenges that required both physical and behavioral solutions, and ancient peoples who evolved effective solutions were more biologically successful than those who didn't. We commonly believe that when people are ill and weak, their weakness is exacerbated by an avoidance of food. This is a classic example of a misattribution, a mistake in correctly identifying a cause and effect relationship. Not surprisingly, water-only fasting stimulates the immune system, while even modest amounts of sleep deprivation compromise immune function. Together, water-only fasting and resting are important instincts that guide behavior toward optimizing the healing response. People have mistakenly assumed that an increase in food intake causes the regaining of health. In reality, this is precisely backwards. It is the increase in health that results in the reappearance of hunger. The natural tendency to abstain from eating is not obvious. Like other potent self-healing adaptations, this adaptive mechanism has been misconstrued and routinely mismanaged throughout medical history, as were fever, inflammation, and vomiting. The utility of refraining from eating when ill is only beginning to become appreciated. But fasting during illness is only one part of our story. There's another situation common in the natural world which triggers water-only fasting adaptive package, an extended period of failure in a healthy animal to find food. The human body has been designed to fast safely. Even in prolonged fasts, those lasting from 20 to 40 days, no deficiency diseases develop. We have the innate capacity for prolonged water-only fasting. This capacity, which requires complex bodily machinery, did not just happen, any more than our eyes and ears just happen to be part of our design. Such complex design is irrefutable evidence that our ancestors slowly evolved sophisticated, reliable machinery for managing caloric deprivation. A large set of self-healing machinery is facilitated during water-only fasting, many components of which are more active during fasting than in any other state. As a result, water-only fasting is a self-healing adaptation of great practical significance. We have repeatedly observed that the human body has marvelous healing capacities that require the optimal environment to be fully expressed. The exclusive intake of pure water in an environment of complete rest is that optimal environment. The desire to do something rather than to quit doing something appears to be a natural human behavioral bias. This bias dominates modern medicine, both conceptually and in practice. In Western civilization, the leading associated cause of death and disability is high blood pressure. This condition is the leading associated cause of heart attacks, strokes, and congestive heart failure, collectively the leading causes of death and disability in industrialized societies. If blood pressure is consistently elevated above appropriate levels, the high blood pressure itself can be a direct cause of arterial damage and lead to greater risk of heart attack, stroke, and congestive heart failure. In this way, high blood pressure is both a symptom of serious cardiovascular disease as well as a causal factor of the disease in itself. Medication management of high blood pressure does little to halt or reverse the buildup of arteriosclerotic plaques. A removal of the dietary excesses that cause these plaques, however, has been shown to halt or reverse their progression. Since water-only fasting results in the complete removal of excess dietary fat and protein, it improves blood pressure quickly and dramatically. Modern diets often contain more sodium than some people are able to excrete via the kidneys. This excessive sodium results in excessive water retention and thus elevated blood pressure. Sodium and potassium are essential nutrients that work together to regulate fluid levels throughout the body. These two nutrients counterbalance each other perfectly on the ancestral diet. That diet, dominated by fresh fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, typically contained about 4 times as much potassium as sodium. This is identical to the ratio of potassium and to sodium within our own bodies at any given time. However, if dietary sodium is excessive, which is now the norm because of excessive animal products devoid of potassium and processed foods laden with added sodium, this natural balance can be disrupted. Most people now consume 2 to 3 times as much sodium as potassium, meaning that the sodium to potassium ratio has been altered by a factor of 10. This radical 10-fold reversal can play havoc with the body's fluid regulation system, causing the kidneys to work extremely hard to excrete great excesses of dietary sodium in order to maintain appropriate fluid levels. For many people, this system works well for decades, with the kidneys managing to keep fluid levels and thus blood pressure within normal parameters. After an average water-only fasting period of about 10 days, followed by a week on a vegan-vegetarian diet, our 174 patients experienced an average reduction in blood pressure of 37 to 13. This is about 3 times the effect demonstrated by standard medical intervention, easily the most powerful effect reported anywhere in the scientific literature. We sometimes wish that our results were due to some peculiar potion, medicinal plant, or herbal concoction that could be sold by the pill. For if it were, our secret would probably be widely accepted, and we might be rich and famous as well. We would probably be readily believed because adding something and therefore doing something seems much more intuitively reasonable than subtracting the unlikely causes and letting the body heal itself. We find it ironic that in our environment of abundance and technological capability, the most effective treatment for our most widespread public health problem is not some chemical or surgical procedure. It is simply drinking pure water in an environment of complete rest. We know that water-only fasting does much more than just normalize high blood pressure. There have been outstanding results with conditions such as adult-onset diabetes, congestive heart failure, angina, atherosclerosis, digestive disorders, osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, colitis, chronic constipation, irritable bowel syndrome, asthma, food and environmental allergies, skin problems, fibrocystic breast disease, chronic fatigue, low back pain, chronic headaches, and more. While the recovery and maintenance of health are excellent motivators for healthy living, the most effective motivation is maximum gustatory pleasure. Fasting makes it possible for this to be experienced with health-promoting foods and leaves unhealthy foods seemingly overly stimulating, like a room with lighting that is painfully bright. The problems that face us now are almost never genetic flaws to be most effectively exorcised by yet-to-be-discovered miracles of modern medicine. The problems we now face and will continue to face in the 21st century are overwhelmingly problems of dietary excess and recreational drug use, along with deficiencies of sleep and exercise. This is the end of this book summary. Thank you very much for watching.